our website. And we'll take all votes by a roll call. Staff has some additional virtual logistical announcements before we take the roll. Stephanie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a reminder to the attendees who wish to address, I'm sorry, I'm starting in the wrong place. This meeting is being recorded. Please use your full name in the Zoom platform. Please use your mute function when not speaking. This will help eliminate excess background noise. Members of the public, if you have a question during the meeting, please use the chat box, which staff will be monitoring. Additionally, if you wish to address the committee during the public comment portion of the agenda, please indicate in the chat box that you wish to do so. Members of the committee, when making a motion, please use your name so staff can properly record it. That concludes my meeting announcements. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Roll call, please.
Chairman Reinbold.
Here.
Mayor Broley.
Here.
Stefan Schaefer.
Here.
Diane Williams.
Present.
Aaron Dernbaugh. And is there anyone else from the Climate Committee stepping in for Aaron? No. Okay. Kevin Carrier.
Present.
And Bob Tucker, or anyone else from the Regional Economy Committee standing in for Bob. Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Stephanie. Are there any agenda changes?
There are none.
Okay, thank you. Hearing none, we'll move on to our next item, which is our Executive Director, Aaron Alleman, has joined us today to give us a few words and updates. Aaron, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Chairman Reinbold. I'm happy to be here this morning. I want to just call your attention to a couple items here in case you may have missed it. We recently published our 2022 annual report. The report is organized around our 3 focus areas that are found in our strategic direction: transportation, climate, and regional economic competitiveness. It looks back at some significant progress that we've made over the last calendar year and really highlights how we are working to improve our transportation system across the region, address climate resiliency, and really at the same time ensuring that we have a thriving economy. Again, all of this while embracing our goal of making sure that our work provides an equity lens. It highlights our continued efforts to deliver local assistance and resources and to inform and engage diverse audiences as well. As we look ahead to 2023 and beyond, we'll continue to address challenges as regions everywhere are doing, including solving our transit funding crisis, addressing traffic safety and saving lives, investing in declining infrastructure, improving equity and accessibility across our communities and counties across the region, mitigating the impacts of climate change, and again, continuing to maintain our region's strong economic position in the global economy as our nation's freight hub for goods and people movement. We look forward to continuing to serve, shape, and solve together, all of this with our amazing staff that we have here at CMAP, and your partnership is really a critical element to all of our work, so thank you. I've also recently had the pleasure of being out across the region these past several weeks, sharing our State of the Region updates with our partners, including providing updates on our work to advance these regional priorities and sharing some of the findings from our public sentiment survey and presenting regional excellence awards. I'll just a couple highlights from that work and that research that we have is that we do believe, and I think the public is sharing, that they are seeing that the region is thriving together. Again, that's our theme for the 2023 State of the Region work that we put out. The survey findings overall showed that residents' outlooks remained fairly constant since our last survey in 2021. We did see some increased concern around economic issues, particularly the cost of housing. And residents overall, though, continue to value the region's many assets, particularly access to parks and open space, and ability to get to where they need to go with, I'll highlight that, relative ease. I know from day to day, it can be very frustrating to travel too. Residents also showed great support for more equitable transportation investments and local action on climate change. Details about the survey, along with the regional excellence winners, and we've put together some really great video spotlights, can be found on our website. And then just as a reminder here, tomorrow, the state's disaster declaration will be rescinded, which means that this committee and all of our public bodies will return to in-person meetings to comply with the Open Meetings Act. Please let us know if you have any questions about that. Please plan for travel time accordingly. A coordinating committee. So I just wanted to give you a little tee up here before you get into our agenda here. As we've shared with the board and our various committees over the past year, our strategic direction really aims to help guide us, focus our work over the next 5 years. It identifies specific goals in the 3 focus areas where the agency can achieve measurable progress towards ON to 2050. Again, key performance indicators have been identified in the strategic direction, and those will be used to track CMAP's progress and measure success through our activities. Again, these complement the broader regional indicators that we use to measure the implementation of the 2050 plan, that 30-year plan. But again, we want to make sure that we're making progress over the next 5 years here, and better understand how our programs, our activities, our work here at the agency, are they helping us get there in incremental ways along the way? So again, this committee, along with our board, our policy committees, continue to play an important and valuable role in supporting the implementation of these plans. So today, you will hear from staff who will review this committee's goals and objectives for this year, and we hope to engage you in a dialogue and collaborate with you on strategies and solutions. I'll just share that as leaders of your community and leaders and experts in areas of work that are so important to CMAP's work, your valuable insights help us see the connections that we might not otherwise see here. So for example, we hope to gain some input from you today at the intersection of housing and transportation, or freight and climate. But just from me to you, from our staff to you all, I want to thank you again for your continued partnership and leadership on these issues that we all care about. Again, we truly appreciate your support and your commitment to our mission and our vision to create an inclusive and thriving region here in the Chicago region. With that, Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have, but looking forward to the discussion today.
Very good. Thank you, Aaron. Are there any questions from committee members for Aaron? Okay, thank you, Aaron. We appreciate that update. And we will now move to our next item, which is the approval of the minutes. A copy of the minutes for November 9th, 2022 were included in your meeting packets. Are there any requested changes or corrections to the minutes? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, a motion is in order.
So moved.
First by Matt, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Seconded.
And I'm sorry, who was the second by? I don't see it on my screen.
Seconded by Schaefer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schaefer. Appreciate it. Are there any other questions related to the presentation of the minutes? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, roll call, please.
Chairman Reinbold,
Yes.
Mayor Broley,
Yes.
Stefan Schaefer,
Yes.
Diane Williams,
Since I wasn't here, I think I have to abstain.
and Kevin Carrier.
Same, I'm gonna have to abstain on these.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Our next item is item 4.01, which is the Coordinating Committee Annual Report. And we will start this off. I think, Stephanie, you will take the lead on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, included in your packets was the 2022 Coordinating Committee Annual Report. Pursuant to the bylaws, the committee does provide an annual report to the board, which really outlines the mission that Aaron spoke about this committee to contribute to the agency's implementation of the strategic direction and long-range transportation plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Katie Petrowski, who's going to give you some highlights from the report.
Thanks, Stephanie. So in 2022, the committee's work plan focused on topics that exemplified one of CMAP's core values, including driving innovation, serving with passion, fostering collaboration, leading with excellence, and pursuing equity, as well as one of the focus areas that Aaron spoke about, so transportation, climate, and regional economy. So some examples of work and topics that were covered in 2022 by the committee included the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and CMAP's role in facilitating regional collaboration and funding opportunities. We also talked about ADA transition work that CMAP is taking on. We also did an overview of the Community Alliance for Regional Equity, or CARE program, which aims to create partnerships between community organizations and CMAP. And finally, the committee received annual reports from the working level committees, which aim to increase cross-collaboration between those working level committees and the board representatives. In 2023, we're off to a good start with this meeting. As Aaron mentioned, we'll be discussing the strategic direction as well as the intersection of housing and transportation and freight and climate. That concludes our report. Please let us know if you have any questions.
Great. Are there any questions for Katie? Okay, thank you, Katie. We appreciate that update. Thank you very much. Moving on to our next item, which is item 4.02, which is the CMAP strategic direction. And we will start this presentation of strategic alignment and innovation. And Alex will take the lead on this. Alex.
Thank you, Chair Reinbold. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning. So before we dive into our workshop, I just wanted to give a little recap about the strategic direction and our program development to set the stage. So hopefully you all should have received a copy of the strategic direction in a memo a few weeks ago, and along with our annual report. We're really excited to share this with our committees. I think as Executive Director Alleman said, this is really going to focus our work over the next few years, especially as we head into our next long-range plan development, so that we can really focus on our impact. So next slide, please. So to recap, over the past year, we went out to our committees, we talked to our staff, we talked to a lot of stakeholders, and incorporated a lot of feedback into the strategic direction, which we have incorporated through refined approaches and objectives, as well as hearing from our partners what are actually useful measures of success. So we've incorporated key performance indicators that we'll be using to track our success that were sourced directly from our partners and implementers. With the completion of the strategic direction, now that we have those approaches in hand, we're beginning the process all across the agency of developing multi-year work plans for each of our program areas. We've already aligned our FY 2024 work plan to those 3 focus areas that were mentioned, and we're going to build on that alignment with our 2025 work plan, as well as having multi-year work plans so that we can be more strategic about what we're focusing on year over year. Next slide, please. So in these 3 focus areas, we have some key projects that I think you've already heard quite a bit about at really every level, because we're going to everyone when we're talking about the Plan of Action for Regional Transit or the Safe Travel for All Roadmap, for example. We also have another key initiative that we launched recently, the Greater Chicagoland Economic Partnership. So we have a lot of work happening within these 3 focus areas, but we also have a lot of work happening at the intersection of these focus areas. And as we develop some of these program areas, we'd really like to utilize this committee and our other committees to make sure that we're being really intentional when we're thinking about how we, how we have work that exists at the intersection of transportation and climate, or economy and climate, to make sure that we're being really considerate of climate implications, for example, of our transportation projects, as opposed to maybe working against some of our climate goals with our transportation goals. Next step, please. Next slide, please. So the strategic direction is organized around what we're calling approach pathways. We're using a modified theory of change for the strategic direction so that we can really, again, focus on how we get from here to there. So all of our work is organized into what we call activities. Those are basically our projects. Those are, things like conducting research, developing tools, providing technical assistance. And then those are organized into approaches. Each of our program areas, each of those multi-year work plans are going to tackle 3 approaches from the strategic direction. And then we're going to measure our success at the outcome level. So the outcomes are those changes that we want to see and that CMAP can actually expect its activities to advance. So we think our work will feed into that impact. That will in turn feed into the objectives that might require some help from our partners, and then our goals, which again, get at the larger scope of goals we want to see across the region. Next slide, please. So in order to do this work, we've really thought about what CMAP's lane is and what CMAP can actually do to affect change. So we've split CMAP's work into what we're calling 3 levers. The first lever is to plan regionally and locally. The second lever is to influence change. And the third lever is to invest strategically. So this really gets at the things that CMAP can do and how CMAP can support its partners across the region in implementing the strategic direction as well as on to 2050. When we're doing these multi-year work plans and developing these program areas, we're ensuring that each program area uses all 3 levers to ensure that we're including things like policy development, local and regional planning, data and analysis, distribution of funding, and coalition building throughout all our areas of work so that we can make sure we're taking a holistic approach. Next slide, please. So in 2023, we have a lot to do now that we have the strategic direction in hand. So from April to June of this year, we've begun the development of these program charters and multi-year work plans by doing a lot of workshopping and a lot of engagement with our staff and with our partners. And then from July to August, we're going to try to improve on our annual work planning process. So we're going to take those multi-year work plans and use those to build an annual work plan a little bit earlier in the year and hopefully have it built at least in draft mode early enough that we can go to our partners and talk about our work plan and share it with our committees and receive some feedback. Then in September and October, we're going to begin our budgeting process from that annual work plan, having incorporated some of that feedback from staff and from leadership and from our partners. And then in November, we'll begin an executive review of the budget and work plan and then bring the final draft of the budget and work plan again to our committees and to our board at the end of 2023 and in early 2024. So that was just a quick recap of the strategic direction, just to make sure that I set the stage. But now you're going to delve into a little bit of a deeper dive into some of our work in freight and some of our work in housing, which really exist at the intersections. So freight kind of exists at the intersection of transportation and climate because it can have such big climate impacts, but also economy because freight is one of the biggest economic drivers of the region. And then we're also going to hear a little bit later about some of our housing work. So thank you. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Questions for Alex? Okay. Thank you, Alex. Please proceed.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Michael Cray, and I'm a relative newcomer to CMAP, and it's my first time before this committee this morning. So I'm glad to be here, and good morning. Take you through some considerations that we are having on the development of the freight program. And to begin, I just want to reiterate what Alex said about freight in general, in that it really does touch all 3 of the different focus areas: transportation, economy, and climate. And so there are projects that we have that do touch on all 3 of those focus areas. And freight is vitally important to the Chicago region. It supports over 200,000 jobs within our community and adds hundreds of billions of dollars to the regional economy. So it's a very important aspect of our region, and it's something that we definitely need to think about. And historically, CMAP had a very robust freight planning program. And as you see through here, some of the projects that I'll be going through, you'll see that one of the themes is that we've done a really great job with a lot of our strategic thinking, our regional thinking, but a lot of those products need to be refreshed and renewed. So with that, I want to kind of go through some of these approaches here. And on the screen that we're showing right now, we have two different focus areas: transportation and climate. And so within the transportation focus area, two of our approaches are developing planning resources and coordinated solutions to modernize and improve freight efficiency. And then we also want to use that to reduce impacts on the communities. And within the climate focus area, we want to make sure that we're trying to reduce emission within the transportation industry. So if you go to the next slide, for trying to modernize and improve freight efficiency on the next slide. We've got some previous planning work that we've done, a freight system snapshot and a regional freight direction. But as you see here, both of these were completed in 2017 and 2018. And so both of these products really talk about the overall direction and strategic thinking for the regional freight system. But once again, hasn't been updated since 2018. We also have projects like the commercial services touring model, which really get into the data side and really help us understand what's happening with freight movement. And as you see here, the lever that we're really using for these projects is influencing change. If you go to the next slide, what are we doing to reduce freight impacts on surrounding communities? On the next slide, this is part of our program that is probably the most recent and fresh. We've done a lot of work on prioritizing at-grade rail crossings between railroads and roadways. And you're probably familiar with the CREATE program, but CMAP has also done work prioritizing every single grade crossing within the region. And from those, we've taken a special subset of those, and we've looked into these planning environmental linkages. Basically, we're doing some upfront work to try to get these projects implemented. So here we're really talking about trying to get projects implemented, and we're trying to invest strategically. That's the lever that we're looking at for these projects. Go to the next slide. We also want to try to reduce emissions. And on the next slide, we're currently working on an EV, an electric vehicle infrastructure plan. And part of that plan that's kind of really emerging, this is an ongoing process that we're going through. One of the major outcomes here is we're looking at how we can electrify the commercial fleet. At least where are there areas where CMAP can affect some change and try to get electrification on certain areas. Say like around a freight rail yard or a warehousing and distribution cluster. And going on to the next slide. These approaches here all derive from our economy focus area. So this is the third one. And so we're really here, the approaches are looking at ways basically we can support the regional economy through logistics and through supporting our industrial areas. Next slide. So thinking about a regional economic and industrial strategy, next slide, we've actually done some work in the past on this. And this is again where we perhaps need to refresh and renew, to borrow a term from a CTA program. We've done a lot of work looking at manufacturing and supply chain trends and issues within the Chicago region. But again, this is something that hasn't been updated really since 2015. So this is some things that we need to be looking at in the next iteration of this freight program. Next slide. Again, we want to make sure we can support the freight industry specifically. And we've done that in the past as well. On the next slide. We've looked into our freight clusters, and we've also really drilled down into the O'Hare subregion. And we've done a couple of these different drill downs into different subregions throughout the Chicago area. But again, these are things that we haven't thought about very broadly since 2014 at the latest. And finally, I want to give some examples of how we are looking to mitigate the impacts of freight-related industries on local communities. And so we've been doing some truck routing studies, and this has been something that we've been doing since 2017. The O'Hare Truck Routing and Infrastructure Plan came out of the O'Hare drill down report, and that was a successful planning effort. And we've been continuing on that in different areas throughout the region. Currently, we're doing work in South Suburban Cook County as well as Will County, looking at truck routing and community development within those areas. And we're currently scoping 2 different projects, Northwest Cook and Kane County. So we want to continue those locally focused programs, as well as we then continue to refresh and renew some of that strategic thinking. And so that, I believe that's the last slide here. Yeah. So that's kind of, I guess, pretty specific overview of some of the previous and current planning work that we're doing within the freight space. But I wanted to open it up for questions. And Alex, I don't know if you want to do that now or if we should wait until the end to kind of talk about some questions.
Yeah, we can take any questions or comments at this time. Questions and comments from the committee members.
Hi, I unmute myself first. This is Diane. Just
Hi,
a
Diane.
couple of quick questions. So I probably should know this and don't. And that is when we talk about, emissions, reducing emissions, and we talk about sort of climate impact and that kind of thing, we almost always, of course, focus on electrical vehicles and sort of how we're going to move that whole thing forward. I guess the question I always wonder about is, so is there any opportunity for a common charging technology? I mean, today, different manufacturers have different charging technology, which means that you have to find that, the charging station or the place that really can serve you. I know when we think about trucks, we think about them doing that sort of in-house or whatever, but if they're long distance trucks, they're going to have to stop along the way and the rest of that. So I'm just wondering what's going on with that.
Good question.
That is a good question, and I don't have a specific answer for you. I do know that is something that we are trying to consider in the EV charging planning work that we're doing. Is where, like you said, a lot of this technology is kind of market driven. It's privately driven. But where is the space that we can come in on the public side to help influence that? That's kind of what we're trying to figure out at this point.
Yeah, I know it's a tough one. I hope that that there are other folks in other regions that are also sort of thinking about it, because I think about it across the board. If we really want individuals as well as businesses to move to those kind of vehicles, then it's got to be easy to do that. One second question, and then I quit. In your last slide, you talk about the truck routing studies, and you specifically mentioned South Suburban Cook and Will County. I'm just wondering if there's what's going on with that. What do we know at this point, or am I asking sooner than I should?
Well, those are finishing up at this point, and honestly, Jonathan Birch is here with us today. He has been overseeing those plans, and he would be better positioned to answer that question.
Sure, I can hop in here. So
you.
Will County is one where we finished that work in 2021, and actually have been helping communities work on implementation of the recommendations
Okay.
related at submitting documentation to IDOT in order to get jurisdictional change it or get a class roadway classification changes, things of that nature. The South Suburban Cook one is currently wrapping up. So I know we've gone through the process with many municipalities. There may be in fact a few mayors on the call who've had staff who've been involved in that as well, where we have been working through those recommendations right now. That's slated to be completed by the end of this fiscal year, so by the end of June. But
Okay.
if there's more details you'd like, I'd be happy to connect you with the person who's directly managing the project, Diane.
I was really just more curious. For some reason, I thought we were at a different stage in the Will County, and we are. So I'm not completely off in my memory. But I am eager to know what we're learning about Cook County, South Suburban Cook County, and what kind of plans we might have for it. But I can wait until they're ready.
That was
Thank
great.
you.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you, Diane. Couple questions for Michael. In your presentation, as far as freight modes, you touched on rail and truck. Might we also consider a couple other freight modes, that being air freight and also marine access, either from Lake Michigan? We are a relatively large port, and then the inland waterways. There's a lot of barge traffic that moves through our area. So might those two additional areas be opportunities to look at creating some efficiencies?
Absolutely. That's definitely something that we can look into. I know in terms of marine access, we've done some port work in the past. I'm not sure about the inland waterways, but yeah, definitely those are aspects of it.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate that. Do you have any closing comments on your topics? Okay, great. Hearing none, we'll move on to our next item, which is other business. Is there any other new business to come before the committee this morning?
Actually, Mr. Chair, there's another segment of this.
Oh,
regarding
I'm sorry.
regional housing coordination. So
Okay.
that's some more information for you.
I apologize. Please proceed. Thank you.
No worries at all, Mayor. As Michael and Alex covered, CMAP has begun work unpacking its role. Started in the wrong spot. So again, my name is Jonathan Birch. It's glad to chat with you all this morning as we start plotting out our course for future housing work in alignment with the strategic direction. CMAP has long done different types of housing work here at the agency, whether that be regional data and tracking, convening partners, or directly assisting communities with housing planning issues at the local level, and often done that in partnership with others, whether that be the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, Metropolitan Planning Council, IDA, counties, local communities. On the screen, you'll see some key points from IIJA. Thank you. Next slide. So you'll see some key points from IIJA that outline some of the possibilities that are out there in the housing space, because it did include many provisions that changed some of the requirements for MPOs as it relates to housing, and points to also to the intersectionality of the program at sort of linkage of transportation and the economy. IIJA requires CMAP, previous slide, please. Thank you. It requires CMAP and other MPOs to do more dedicated housing coordination work with funders, particularly entities like housing authorities, entities that get HUD money, or the State Housing Finance Agency, IDA. It calls for deeper integration of housing in the metropolitan transportation planning process, and it gives CMAP the option of developing a housing coordination plan, and really to ultimately bring together those linkages between housing and transportation. And this is sort of an area I really want to highlight as one that we're wrestling with right now, trying to think about how should CMAP's role as a transportation funder link with our housing work, particularly beyond the sort of obvious consultation coordination pieces that are called out by IIJA. Next slide. So as Alex covered, we have begun unpacking CMAP's role in the housing space, past, present, and future, in alignment with both IIJA and the strategic direction. You can see that there's sort of two primary objectives, both of which fall under that regional economy focus area: increased inclusive growth and increased economic opportunity. And then those thread down from there to the outcome level, to the specific approach level, and finally, ultimately, to the individual project. As you can see, overall, this work is very much framed through two windows, one in terms of linking housing and transportation, and the power of how those two together can increase inclusive growth in our region. And one, in terms of increasing the capacity of disinvested communities to get the resources they need to increase economic opportunity. And of course, both of these have strong ties to housing issues across the region because, of course, housing is a critical part of the infrastructure that the region needs to grow equitably and ultimately compete. So as Michael did, I'm going to walk through a few example projects. These are often not projects that are currently ongoing, but ones that we're planning to start in FY24 and then may thread on into future projects in fiscal years beyond that, that we're considering under the approaches outlined above to help bring them to life. Next slide. So the first approach area you're going to walk through is developing resources and increasing awareness of the economic benefits of diverse, affordable, and connected housing options. Next slide. So you may have all heard of, maybe some of you even helped respond to the 2022 municipal survey that CMAP put out there, and it asked communities questions about the major housing issues facing them. This is a snapshot of those results. As you can see, no one topic sort of dominates all the others, some more so than others, but certainly no one that's like, yes, that's the one issue everyone wants to talk about. But at the same time, we know housing matters, as Aaron talked about earlier and reaffirmed through the State of the Region public opinion survey. So many folks express concerns about rising rents, mortgage payments, their housing costs, and how that can be a real concern, and how affordability is a longstanding concern here in the region. But also there's a lot of nuance in terms of the housing issues that folks want to talk about across the region. And perhaps, as this slide also indicates, there's some need for education or disconnect between residents and local leaders about the degree to which housing issues are front and center for folks right now. Next slide. And that's why one of the early projects that we're considering would be the development of housing snapshots for communities, counties, and Chicago community areas. As we saw earlier, there are ultimately many different issues across the region in terms of the housing space and perhaps differing levels of understanding of those issues. And fewer still, there are resources out there that ultimately make the connection between housing issues in a community and the region and our overall transportation system. CMAP feels that consistent and frequently updated information can help provide that baseline understanding at a local and regional scale. And ultimately, one of the most common requests that CMAP gets in the housing space is for baseline data, whether that be from elected officials and staff or from interested residents who just want to understand more what's happening in their communities and how that ultimately links back to the region and transportation issues overall. And so that's why we think providing this sort of data on an ongoing basis with these housing focused snapshots is a key part of producing housing analysis for the region that ultimately helps address those sorts of questions and addresses some of those educational concerns. Next slide. Our second approach area is supporting the implementation of diverse and connected housing options. Next slide. CMAP has long talked about the importance of a variety of housing types in the region and in individual communities. This is the framing that was taken in onto 2050 and harkens back even to go to 2040. We asked a couple questions in the 2022 municipal survey, and you can see the results on the screen broken out by our community cohorts, which break communities across the region in terms of access to different levels of resources, with community cohort 1 being those with the highest resources and cohorts 4 having access to lower resources. But some, but not all municipalities are already doing some thinking about the need for more diverse housing options in the region, or so at the extremes, cohorts 1 and 4. But as you can see, and we just talked a little bit about, there maybe is also an ongoing need for an education component that would be critical to this work, because certainly not everyone's talking about it. Next slide. Actually, as we started thinking about the housing work we may be doing in the future, one of the things we did was have conversations with different focus groups and subsets in November and December of 2022. One of the things we actually heard, one of the ideas we heard from partners at that time, was the concept of housing readiness. This sort of question of what makes a community ready to build or retain housing the region needs in order to be diverse and connected, whether that be connected to transportation, jobs, schools, amenities, parks, things of that nature. But the process of defining that, understanding how housing readiness differs across the region, who and who is not already housing ready, those are tricky questions to answer. And so this near-term project would focus on trying to answer those questions, particularly how they vary across the region and what folks need to do in various areas to become housing ready. But of course, there's a long-term goal that comes out of this. It's nice to be able to say what is or is not housing ready, but in the long term, also needs to be a component related to providing assistance to communities to directly help them complete those tasks and become housing ready. And so in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see these slides actually have the implementation levers that Alex was talking about earlier, and talking about which implementation lever this project would be pulling on. Here, we're talking about influencing change. But of course, there's 3 different implementation levers in the long term for these program areas to be successful as a framing element, and these individual projects to be successful. They need to string together, pulling multiple different types of levers within the same sort of project string in order to be able to create impact. And that's what sort of the follow-on work would do here. While this slide is focusing on housing readiness near term, sort of defining that in the region, the follow-on activities would be moving into the other levers, things like plan regionally and act locally, that provide direct assistance to communities to help them be able to actually become housing ready. And so as you're thinking a little bit about this, I think one of the questions that we're wrestling with a lot is what does make a community ready to address housing mismatch issues at the local level. Next slide. Our final approach area is prioritizing investment in communities affected by disinvestment and support state and local governments doing the same. Next slide. We have heard so much about the need for additional resources for communities, especially cohorts 3 and 4, to combat disinvestment in their housing stock. You see this when looking at the municipal survey results on the screen. Larger shares of cohort and 3 and 4 communities really talk about as pressing issues for them, topics like vacancy, foreclosure, abandonment, poor housing conditions. Municipal focus groups that we conducted in December only reinforced what we've seen through the survey, through previous technical assistance work. Towns need help applying for, getting, and using resources, whether that be state or county housing rehabilitation funds, resources like Ida Strong Communities Program, other similar sorts of resources. Next slide. And that is why one of the ideas we're considering is a project called Housing Rehabilitation in the Region. From years of technical assistance, we understand that the demand for housing rehab resources far outstrips what is available. And there's very much as a patchwork system of resources available at the local, county, and state levels. It's hard for residents to be able to access what's available, hard to stack those resources or bundle them together to create impact for an individual household, and major differences in what's available where, depending on the capacity and sort of the nature of that patchwork. This project would map that landscape, help understand what the best programs are doing in order to be able to combine them together and create impact, and ultimately help increase access to support individual residents and their need for housing rehabilitation. Again, pulling that near-term level of influencing change, but in the long term to have follow-on projects that would come out of this to pull in other levers, whether that's to plan regionally or locally or invest strategically as critical pieces, sort of depending on the outcome of the work. And of course, these are just some of the ideas that we're thinking about on the housing side of things. We're still very much in the program development phase and interested in hearing from you all about some of the questions that I highlighted earlier, as well as considering just overall from you, what are the concerns you're hearing from your community's constituents and others that we should be considering? What are the housing issues that are sort of most pressing for you, as well as thinking about CMAP's intersection between housing and transportation, and how our work as a housing funder ultimately ties back into the housing, or our role as a transportation funder ultimately ties back into the transportation work we do. So I think I flipped that around again, but hopefully you caught it earlier. Thanks so much. I'm gonna leave some time here for questions.
Very good. Thank you, Jonathan. Are there any questions for Jonathan?
I have a question and a little bit of a comment. So first of all, let me thank each presenter today. I'm always impressed by the CMAP thinking and the people doing that thinking. And so today certainly reinforces why I'm always excited about it. And even if I don't have a lot of questions and comments during the meeting, and I'll have a few, but not a lot maybe, I always come up with more stuff afterwards because you kind of stimulated the thinking. But in this particular presentation, I mean, again, I also think housing is important. I laugh because at one point I thought, oh, that's not our job, that's somebody else's worry, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, all of it is intertwined. There's no real way to totally separate all of that. And so as I listen to you talk about sort of readiness for a community to develop new housing, and I hear you talk about a rehabilitation program, I think those are directly related. Because in those communities, where you want to talk about building, you need to make sure that, that what's there today is shored up before you do anything around new construction, I think. If you want that new construction to actually invite, if you will, varied income levels and that sort of thing to that community. And so I'm sure you've thought about that and you're working towards it, but I just think it's important to mention that they really do also connect, and to not pay attention to that could miss a point.
I appreciate that comment. That's very much one of the things that's been on our mind. I know there's sort of a national discussion, maybe we've seen in various articles or things like that that talk about sort of growing our housing supply, but it's hard to grow our housing supply and make sure it's meeting the needs of the population in the future if we're losing units out the back door because they're, foreclosed upon, vacant, abandoned. We can't make progress on the supply issues if we're losing units too. So thanks for that, Diane.
Yeah, I would say so. I'm sure that the chair and Aaron probably are aware that SDA is doing some work in that arena in Harvey, and it would probably be good to make sure that you're connecting on what we're learning, and maybe offer some shortcuts along the way.
Yeah, no, absolutely, we'd love to do that.
Okay,
Yep.
great.
Point, Diane. In addition to that, you mentioned SDA, which is a great partnership opportunity, but also our land banks.
Mhm.
Maybe also an opportunity, both the county and the South Suburban Land Bank, in terms of rehabbing houses and getting them back on the market. As far as resources go, in support of housing rehab, if we could come up with a list, the ones that come to mind, some of the organizations are CDGB, maybe a resource for that. Cook County, I believe, just recently came out with a program for veterans to help them
Yep.
do home improvements. Many of our seniors would like to age in place, but rehabbing and maintaining their property has become a challenge for many of our seniors. So that might be another opportunity. I don't know if they're still around. There used to be an organization called Christmas in July, and they would come out and do property maintenance things on homes. Specifically, I believe it was for seniors, but that is a program that allowed many seniors to age in place. So just a couple ideas on access to the type of support that might be out there.
Thanks, Mayor. No, absolutely. Those are the sorts of patchwork nature, all the slightly different programs, which are not all connected and sort of bundled together, sort of speaks to also the challenge that folks have in terms of being able to navigate that and the wide discrepancies in terms of what communities and what residents or even have some of these resources available to them. Because to your point, not every county uses their CDBG resources heavily for housing rehab. Some do, some don't.
Right.
It varies depending on the county or even on the municipality if they have access to those resources.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Great presentation by all three of our presenters. Thank you all. Before we move on, are there any questions for any of our presenters today on the topic?
Yeah, Mayor, I just wanted to echo what Diane Williams said. There's this, and everybody knows there's this push for affordable new housing. And I should acknowledge I'm too close to the new housing realm probably for this conversation, but there's this push for affordable new housing and sort of abandoning the idea of investing in some of our existing housing stock that's happening, in the suburbs. So I do appreciate the thought and the desire to kind of educate the municipalities and our elected officials on rehabbing kind of what we have, investing in our current, housing stock as opposed to publicly financing new construction of, new single family or attached products. So, but thank you.
Great point. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions related to the presentation?
Yeah, Chair, I was going to jump into just a kind of a
Please.
quick question / comment for maybe Jonathan, but all in all, great presentation. I thought found it very informative. Jonathan, you mentioned in there, I saw a couple times talking about connected housing. Kind of the question is being, I guess, what is you define, or what are your definitions of the connected housing? Like in the transportation world, I guess what comes out to mind is, bike paths, sidewalks, first, last mile, transit connections and stuff, even access to broadband and internet and stuff like that. Is that kind of all the above? Is there anything Anything else in that definition, or is it something different that I'm not thinking of maybe?
Yeah, I do think like some of it probably depends from community to community exactly how we would define that. We're still, I think, very much in the process of that through the housing readiness piece. I think you've got definitely some of the pieces. I do think proximity to jobs is one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about, given sort of the economic empowerment access nature of some of the housing issues we want to talk about too. So probably not just the physical infrastructure in terms of streets or roads or transit or bike paths or sidewalks or things like that, but also its location relative to amenities. So things like jobs is an important one to be thinking about too.
Good point. Just in terms of housing, another thought that just came to mind is when we're having this discussion, should we be talking about housing for the homeless? Different parts of the country have and it's hadn't been addressed through zoning, but perhaps allowing communities to have smaller square footage. Many have minimum square footage requirement for multifamily housing. So perhaps something to consider to help address the homeless problem, but also, and we're seeing it more in, I think, markets that have extremely high property values, but the option of what I believe is called an in-law housing facility, where what's traditionally been single family properties, the allowance of a small square foot standalone structure on the property that would allow an aging family member to have perhaps live closer to their family. But just, I mean, there's a lot of things we can talk about in housing, but these are just some ideas of things that we might take a look at.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Okay, thanks. Are there any other closeout questions or comment? This has been a great discussion. Thank you all. Okay, hearing none, we will now move on to other business. Is there any new business to come before the committee this morning? Hey, thank you. Hearing none, we'll move to our next item, which is public comment. At this time, staff will read any comments received prior to today's meeting and recognize those speakers that may have joined us in the chat box. Stephanie?
Mr. Chair, we did not receive comments prior to today's meeting, and we have not received any requests in the chat box to address the committee. However, at this time, I would ask if anyone on the call wishes to address the committee as part of public comment. And hearing none, it appears there's no individual wishing to address the committee at this time.
Very good. Thank you, Stephanie. Our next meeting is going to be September 13th, 2023. Please note that this meeting will be in person at the CMAP offices. So we look forward to getting back to some degree of normalcy for our meetings. Is there any closing comments or statements from any member of the committee or staff? Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and we stand adjourned. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.